For 3 years, he ignored her completely. Then she started coming home at 3 a.m., and suddenly, she was all he could think about. This is that story. Chapter 1. The city was asleep, but Chantal wasn't ready to go upstairs yet. 3 a.m. and Atlanta had gone quiet, just streetlights and the distant hum of the highway. A black Range Rover sat in the underground parking garage of the most expensive building on Peachtree Street. Engine off. And inside, Chantal Kwan had her shoes off, her silk headscarf tilted at an angle that would have genuinely upset her mother, and a strawberry cream puff in her hand that she was finishing without a single trace of guilt. Her phone was propped on the steering wheel. She was watching a video of a baby goat falling down a small hill over and over, and every single time it fell, she laughed like it was brand new. Quietly, to herself, in the dark. She looked happy, really happy. The unperformed kind. Her penthouse was 12 floors directly above her head. She had been gone since before 9 p.m. And she was sitting in a parking garage at 3 a.m. with her shoes off, completely unbothered, in no hurry whatsoever to go upstairs. That one detail, that small, quiet detail, says more about this marriage than anything else ever could. But to understand how Chantal Davis ended up here, we need to go back. 3 years, 4 months, and a handful of days. Back to before she was Chantal Kwan. Back to when she was just Chantal, loud laugh, soft heart, the kind of woman who remembered your name after meeting you once and made you feel like the most interesting person alive even when you weren't. She grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother, Miss Claudette, a woman built from good food, strong faith, and the kind of love that doesn't baby you but never lets you hit the ground either. Miss Claudette had opinions about everything, apologized for none of them, and communicated in 3 languages: scripture, side-eye, and silence. All 3 were equally devastating. Chantal's best friend was Precious Okafor, who was everything Chantal was, and then several additional unsolicited things on top. Zero filter. Maximum loyalty. A supernatural ability to start situations she had no plan to finish. They had been best friends since 7th grade when Precious defended Chantal in a hallway argument using logic so spectacularly flawed and delivered so confidently that the other girl simply walked away confused. That was Precious. Chaotic, loud, and somehow always on the right side of things even when she arrived there by accident. They were at a wedding in Buckhead, outdoor, string lights, expensive flowers, too much wine, when Chantal looked across the garden and saw him. He was standing alone near the bar. Korean. Tall. In a charcoal suit that looked like it had been made for his particular brand of stillness. He wasn't on his phone. Wasn't talking to anyone. Just standing there with a glass of something clear, looking like a man whose mind was somewhere far from this garden and wasn't sure it wanted to come back. Chantal had never been good at leaving a quiet person alone. You know, standing alone at a wedding is basically a public announcement that you're available, right? He looked at her. His face didn't do much, but something in it shifted. The way a room changes when someone opens a window you forgot was there. "I'm not available," he said. "Then you should stand next to someone," she replied, and helped herself to an olive from the dish beside him. He almost smiled. That was the whole problem. That almost smile reached into Chantal's chest and took something, and she let it go without a fight. His name was Taeyong Kwan. And for 6 months after that wedding, he was everything. This is the part people don't know. This is the part that makes the rest of it so hard to understand from the outside. Because Taeyang, before everything shifted, was not a cold man. He was a careful man who had found someone that made careful feel unnecessary. He called her in the middle of his workday for no reason. He remembered things she mentioned once and never repeated. He showed up. He was present in the specific way that feels like being chosen over and over without being asked. He proposed 6 months after that garden. Miss Claudette sat Chantal down with a cup of tea and both hands wrapped around it like she was bracing for impact. "You don't know this man, Chantal. You know how he makes you feel. Those are not the same thing." Chantal heard every word and listened to none of them. Precious bought the most extravagant gift on the registry and cried at the bridal shower, which she denied for months. The wedding was small and beautiful. And the first 3 months of that marriage were everything Chantal had believed they would be. Then Daeho called Taeyong into a private meeting on a Thursday afternoon in the 4th month. And something came home with Taeyong that evening that never fully left. She didn't know what was said in that meeting. She still doesn't. What she knew was that her husband came home that Thursday with a quietness that was different from his usual quietness. Heavier. Sealed. He kissed her forehead when he came in, which he did every evening without fail, but something behind his eyes was already somewhere else. By the end of that week, he was coming home later. By the end of that month, the calls during the day had stopped. By month 6, she had stopped expecting them. Not dramatically. Not all at once. The way you stop expecting rain when a dry season settles in gradually, then completely, until you almost forget what rain felt like. She asked him once. Directly, clearly, the way Chantal did everything. What happened? Where did you go? He looked at her for a long moment and said nothing happened. I'm here. And he was physically, financially, technically present in every measurable way. But the man who had called her in the middle of his workday for no reason had been replaced by someone who occupied the same body and had forgotten how to reach her. She tried for a long time. She cooked dinners. She asked questions. She made space. She waited. And then one evening she covered a plate in foil and put it in the refrigerator, and something in her quietly, without ceremony, accepted that this was what it was now. Year 3 looked like this. Thursday evening. Pepper steak, rice, a salad that took 20 minutes because she still cared enough. Table set for 2. Candle lit, not for romance anymore. Just habit. 8 o'clock. 9. 11. She wrapped his plate in foil, put it in the refrigerator, and ate hers standing at the kitchen counter watching the city. No tears. No angry text. Just a woman who had loved a man fully and completely and somewhere along the way had run out of places to put it. She went to bed. At 1 a.m., the front door opened. She lay still, his keys, his shoes, the refrigerator opening and closing. Footsteps down the hall, slow and careful, stopping outside the bedroom door. She kept her eyes closed. The door didn't open. He stood there, she could feel it, and after a long moment the footsteps moved away. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. He had been right there. What she didn't know was that on the other side of that door, Taeyang stood in the dark hallway with his hand resting flat against the wood. His face, in that empty hallway where nobody could see it, was not cold at all. It was the face of a man who had been told, in the clearest possible terms, that loving her openly was the most dangerous thing he could do to her. And who had believed it. And who was only now, standing outside a closed door at 1 a.m., beginning to understand what that decision had cost them both. Chapter 2. The bakeries smelled like brown butter, warm vanilla, and the specific comfort that only comes from someone who genuinely cares about what they're putting in front of people. Sunday Sweet sat on a quiet corner in Old Fourth Ward, a converted brick space with pale wood shelving, soft lighting, and handwritten menu boards that Chantal redid every single week because she was constitutionally incapable of leaving something alone once she saw room to make it better. The logo was a small sun with a fork through it, designed by Precious in 20 minutes on her phone, and it had become the most photographed thing on that entire block. It opened at 7 a.m. By 7:15, there was usually a line. This was where Chantal actually lived. Not the penthouse here. Here she was loud and certain and quick to laugh. Here she argued passionately about butter temperature with anyone willing to engage. Here she knew every regular by name and order, and at least one real thing about their life. Here she was not a covered plate sitting in a refrigerator. Here she was completely, entirely herself. And this is important because what you're watching every time Chantal walks into Sunday Sweet is what a person looks like when they're living inside the life they actually built for themselves. Hold that image. You'll need it later when things get harder. Precious worked 3 days a week at the front counter. She was not naturally suited to customer service. She had once told a difficult customer that perhaps the issue was his relationship with quality, but she was entertaining. And entertainment kept people coming back almost as reliably as the pastry did. She and Chantal together in that bakery were something to see. An easy rhythm that only exists between people who have known each other long enough to communicate in half sentences and looks. Then the hotel contract arrived on a Tuesday morning and changed the temperature of everything. The Ellery was not just any hotel. It was the kind of establishment with a restaurant waiting list and a lobby that made you feel underdressed just for walking through it. They wanted Sunday Sweet to supply exclusive pastries for their guests, full creative partnership, serious volume, real visibility. For a small independent bakery, this was the kind of opportunity that appears once and doesn't wait if you hesitate. Chantal called Precious from the back kitchen. They screamed loud enough that a woman at the front counter started clapping without knowing why. 2 days later, the hotel sent their creative director. Zion Park walked into Sunday's suite like someone who had never once been in a hurry and had never suffered for it. Easy smile, warm eyes, the particular attentiveness of someone who makes whoever they're talking to feel like the only person in the room. He looked around the bakery before saying anything, genuinely taking it in, and then said, "This place feels like a hug. Whatever we build together, we can't lose that." Chantal liked him immediately. Simply, easily, the way you like someone who is just good at being a person. There was nothing complicated about it. Now, and pay attention here, because this is the part where every viewer is going to panic a little. Zion is warm. Zion is present. Zion listens when Chantal talks and laughs at the right moments and shows up consistently. He is, in this moment, everything that Taeyong currently is not. The late nights started that same week. New recipes, packaging coordination, presentation details, real work that required real hours. Zion stayed because his job required it. Chantal stayed because she was incapable of half measures. They worked past midnight and ate questionable quantities of test pastry, and she laughed in a way that used her whole face and required zero effort. She started coming home at 3 a.m. She didn't tell Taeyong about any of it. Not the contract, not the late nights, not Zion. This wasn't secrecy. There was simply no conversation to put it into. He didn't ask about her day. He never asked about the bakery. So the most important thing happening in her life existed entirely outside their marriage, like a whole world growing in the light while he wasn't looking. That detail is quiet and it is devastating, and it belongs to both of them equally. Taeyong's world looked nothing like Sunday Sweet. The Kwon Syndicate had operated in Atlanta for 11 years. Clean financial structures on the surface, something considerably darker underneath. Taeyong moved money, managed accounts, maintained paper trails that pointed nowhere. He was precise and controlled and extremely good at something he had never chosen, the way people become good at things when they're the only available path for long enough. Daeho ran everything. Charming the way certain dangerous things are charming, completely and convincingly, right until the moment they aren't. He had raised Taeyong after his parents died when Taeyong was 12, and that history sat between them like a debt without a fixed number on it, one Daeho never named and never let disappear. Baek Juno was Taeyong's right hand, steady, quiet, more observant than his role required. 6 years alongside Taeyong had given him an understanding of the man that Taeyong didn't fully have of himself. He watched his boss move through those days and saw something restless underneath the stillness. A man who had built walls so long ago he'd stopped remembering what he was protecting. Then one night Taeyong's secondary phone rang. The voice was careful and low. "Someone has eyes on your wife. Has had for about 2 weeks. It's not one of ours." Taeyong was quiet for 4 full seconds. "Pull them off," he said. "And find out who gave the order." He ended the call and sat with the city spread below him. He told himself this was professional concern, the instinct of a man who understood what it meant when unknown parties developed interest in someone connected to him. He drove home. She was already asleep. He stood outside the bedroom door in the dark hallway for a long moment before walking away. He told himself that was all it was. But before he left that office, he had opened Chantal's contact on his personal phone and stared at it for a long moment without calling. Someone had been watching his wife for 2 weeks. Without his knowledge. Without his permission. And for reasons he wasn't ready to examine yet, that information sat in him like something with weight. Not professional weight. Personal. Chapter 3. The photo was completely innocent. That was the thing about Precious. Her chaos was never malicious. It was just constant, and it arrived without warning, and it did not consult anyone first. She had stopped by Sunday Sweet on a Friday evening to drop off supplies and found Chantal and Zion in the kitchen, losing it over a cake that had collapsed so completely it looked like a different object. Chantal's head was thrown back mid-laugh, her hand on Zion's arm for balance, her whole face open and bright. Precious pulled out her phone the way she did everything, without thinking, without warning, and posted it before the moment had even finished happening. The caption read, *, she's thriving babes. Auntie is winning, * with a flower emoji and a crown. 43 likes in the first hour. Comments from women they went to high school with saying Chantal looked incredible. Precious replied to every single one personally and enthusiastically. She had absolutely no idea what she had just set in motion. Taeyang saw it at 11:47 p.m. Juno placed his personal phone on the desk without a word and took a step back. Taeyang looked at the screen, looked at the photo. Chantal with her head thrown back, laughing fully, her hand on the arm of a man Taeyang had never seen before, in a place that was clearly not their home, looking more alive than he had seen her look in years. He looked at it for a long time. Then he placed the phone face down on the desk, picked up his pen, and returned to his documents without saying a single word. Not one word. And somehow that silence was more unsettling than anything he could have said. Juno stood near the door and felt the room temperature drop without anyone touching a window. Taeyang came home before midnight that night. Chantal was on the couch with her legs tucked underneath her, half-eaten bowl of cereal beside her, watching a documentary she had already seen twice. She heard his keys, heard his footsteps, waited for them to continue down the hall the way they always did. They didn't. He came into the living room and sat in the armchair across from her. Not beside her, across. Like a man who wanted to occupy the same space, but hadn't yet figured out the distance. He loosened his tie, looked at the television, said nothing. Chantal glanced at him once, then back at the screen. "There's food in the refrigerator," she said. "I'm not hungry." She finished her cereal, rinsed her bowl, went to bed. It happened the next evening, and the one after. He came home earlier each time and placed himself wherever she was, kitchen, living room, the small balcony where she stood with tea watching the city. Never crowding her, never forcing conversation, just present in a way he hadn't been in years. Chantal noticed immediately. She would have to be unconscious not to. But she had spent too long learning not to build anything on his behavior to start doing it now. She kept her face even and her expectations exactly where she had put them, on the floor, where they couldn't fall any further. Meanwhile, Precious, with absolutely no awareness of the storm she had started, continued posting. Day 3 of what she had personally titled the Glow Up Chronicles included a video of Chantal taste testing a new recipe with her eyes closed, completely in her element. The caption, *unbothered. Federal flourishing. We love to see it, *. The comments were enthusiastic. Several came from accounts that followed Taeyang. He saw every one of them. He called Juno the next morning. "I want to know her schedule. Where she goes, when she leaves, when she gets back. I want to know she's safe." Juno was quiet for a moment. "And if she is safe? Then you tell me that." Juno wrote it down and said nothing else. But he drove home that evening with his jaw set because he was not comfortable with this, and he knew it, and he did it anyway, which said something about the position he was in and the loyalty that had built that position over 6 years. He documented everything carefully for a full week. Then he sat down to write the report and took considerably longer than 4 pages should have taken. The report landed on Taeyang's desk on a Thursday afternoon. Chantal left at 6:45 a.m. every morning. Arrived at Sunday's suite by 7:10. Worked through the day with focused, quiet confidence. On 3 evenings that week she stayed past midnight. On 2 of those nights, she sat in her car in the parking garage before coming upstairs, once for 11 minutes, once for nearly 30. On the second occasion, Juno had written 4 words, visibly distressed. Composed herself, Taeyang read that line twice. Then a third time. She had been crying in her car. In the garage directly beneath their building. Putting herself back together in the dark before coming upstairs so nobody would see it. How many nights? How many times had he been asleep or absent while she sat down there doing that alone? He put the report down. Pressed both hands flat on the desk. No affair. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing even remotely close. Just a woman working herself to exhaustion, falling apart privately, and walking through their front door composed every single night. He sat with that for a very long time. What he didn't know was that the report was missing something. One detail that Juno had quietly removed and placed in his own private notes instead. Zion Park had asked about Precious 3 separate times across 2 different evenings. Casual, folded naturally into conversation. Your friend who works the counter, she's funny. Is she seeing anyone? With the persistence of a man trying very carefully to appear like he wasn't being persistent. Juno had his reasons for leaving it out. He wanted to understand what it meant before it landed in front of a man who was already carrying more than his glass could hold. He told himself it was professional judgment. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a much clearer picture was beginning to form, one that looked very different from the story currently living in Taeyang's head. The question was how long he could afford to wait before telling him. Because other people were also watching. And unlike Juno, they had no interest in waiting at all. Chapter 4. He showed up on a Tuesday with no warning and no explanation. Taeyong walked into Sunday's suite at 10 a.m. in a dark coat, looked around the bakery like a man who had just entered a country whose customs he hadn't studied, and sat down at the small corner table farthest from the counter. He picked up the menu and studied it with the focused concentration of someone defusing something. Precious saw him first. She went completely still behind the register, remarkable, because Precious had never been completely still in her entire life. She held it for about 4 seconds, then turned slowly toward the kitchen doorway and said, in a very controlled voice, "Your husband is here." Chantal came to the doorway, looked out, took a breath, then wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. Taeyong. I was in the area, he said. This was not true. Sunday's suite was 30 minutes from his office in the completely opposite direction, and they both understood that perfectly well. Chantal handed him the menu without addressing the lie and went back to work. He ordered a plain croissant and an Americano and sat at that corner table for 2 full hours. He watched the bakery operate. Watched Chantal move through her space, directing her staff, tasting things, handling a small delivery issue with the calm efficiency of someone who had built everything around her from scratch. She didn't perform for him. Didn't acknowledge him beyond basic courtesy. He was a customer. She treated him like one. He finished the croissant. Ordered another one. When the morning rush thinned and she had a quiet moment, she came to clear his table. He said, "This one is different from the first." She paused. Second batch had a lamination problem. Butter wasn't cold enough. How do you know? Because I made it and I know when I've rushed something. She picked up his plate. He looked up at her. It was still good, he said. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that gave him absolutely nothing to work with. Then she took the plate back to the kitchen. He came back Thursday. Then the following Monday. Each time, same corner table, same careful attention to whatever he ordered. One quiet observation that was always accurate. It was stiff and awkward in the specific way that happens when two people who were once close have to relearn each other from the beginning. Chantal stayed professional and even and completely unreadable. She had been burned too many times to let a few visits to her bakery mean anything at all. And listen, this is the part that will quietly break your heart if you're paying attention. He wasn't doing grand gestures. He wasn't showing up with apologies or speeches. He was showing up and eating croissants. That was all he had figured out how to do. And somehow that made it worse and better at the same time. Precious watched the whole situation from behind the counter with her arms folded and her mouth uncharacteristically closed. Which meant she had opinions too large for words. Daeho arrived on a Wednesday with no warning and a smile that filled the whole doorway. He greeted Chantal warmly, kissed her cheek, looked around Sunday's suite with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. He ordered 3 things, complimented each one thoughtfully, asked about the hotel contract, told her she was remarkable, said Taeyong was lucky. Every word was perfectly warm. Every word was perfectly reasonable. And the entire time, Chantal smiled and thanked him and felt, underneath all of it, like something was walking slowly around the edges of her looking for a way in. She couldn't point at anything specific. He gave her nothing concrete to react to. He was charming and generous and made her feel quietly, thoroughly uncomfortable in a way she could not yet name. After he left, Precious appeared at her shoulder. That man gives me the feeling I get when a gas burner is on, but there's no flame. Chantal said nothing, but she didn't disagree. Miss Claudette arrived from Atlanta 4 days later with 2 large suitcases, a carry-on, and a slow cooker she had checked as actual luggage. She walked into the penthouse, looked around slowly, and said it looks like a waiting room, before she had even set her bag down. Then she looked at Taeyong and said nothing at all, which from Miss Claudette was the most serious response available. She reorganized Chantal's kitchen on day 2 without asking. She attended Sunday's suite on day 3 and rearranged the front display before Precious physically redirected her. On day 4, she told Taeyong, completely unprompted and over breakfast, that a man who doesn't know his wife's coffee order after 3 years of marriage needs to spend some serious time with himself. Taeyong wrote down the coffee order that same afternoon. That night, Miss Claudette sat with Chantal on the balcony with 2 cups of tea and the city spread out below them. He came to your bakery, she said. A few times. Miss Claudette turned her cup slowly. A man who's waking up is still worth watching, she said. Just don't let him put you back to sleep. Chantal held those words and didn't put them down. The security detail revealed itself through Gerald. Gerald was a Wednesday regular, cheese Danish, black coffee, and the observational habits of a man with unlimited free time. He mentioned casually to Chantal that he kept seeing the same black car parked outside. 3 days running. Same spot. Same tinted windows. Nobody going in or coming out. Chantal noted the plate that afternoon. By Friday evening, she had her confirmation. She called Taeyong. Her voice was level and quiet. Come home. He came without asking why. What followed was 3 years of stored silence arriving all at once. No screaming. No thrown objects. Just Chantal's voice, completely steady, absolutely devastating, delivering every true thing that had been living inside her without anywhere to go. You put someone on me. You have been watching my movements without my knowledge. You don't know my staff's names. You don't know about the hotel contract because I never told you and you never once asked. You don't know what time I eat or whether I eat. You have not asked me one real question in 3 years, not one, but you will pay someone to follow me through my day. Taeyang stood completely still. I have set that table for two every single week for a man who is never there, and I stopped asking for explanations because I stopped believing I was owed one. I have been alone in this marriage. Completely alone. And now you want to watch me? She picked up her keys. You don't get to be jealous of a life you never showed up for. She walked out. He stood in that beautiful, cold penthouse for a long time without moving. Every word she said was true. He had no defense because she had left no gaps for one. What settled over him in that silence wasn't anger. It was the full, heavy weight of understanding exactly what he had built by doing nothing. Chapter 5. The rumor started the way the most dangerous things always do, quietly, from a direction nobody was watching, dressed up to look like concern. It moved through the syndicate the way smoke moves under a closed door. One person mentioned it carefully to someone they trusted. That person carried it to someone else. By the third conversation, it had already begun to feel like established fact, which is exactly what happens when a lie is constructed by someone who understands how people receive information and what they instinctively do with it. The allegation was this. Taeyong Kwan's wife had been passing financial details to a federal contact. Account structures. Movement patterns. The specific kind of information that could only come from someone living inside the household of a syndicate operator. Juno heard it on a Thursday morning from a mid-level man who mentioned it the way you mention weather. Casually. Like it was already settled. Juno kept his face completely neutral. Excused himself. Found a quiet stairwell and stood in it and breathed for a moment because he needed to. He knew immediately it wasn't true. He had watched Chantal's life for weeks. He knew what it looked like. He also knew, with a cold certainty that sat in him like stone, exactly what kind of person builds a story like this, and exactly what it is designed to do. This was not a rumor that had grown on its own. It had been planted. Deliberately and carefully, by someone who knew precisely how information traveled through this organization. He didn't go to Taeyong. Not yet. He needed to build something solid before he could counter it. He opened a private file that evening and started working quietly, the way you work when you know the storm is coming and everything depends on what you build before it arrives. Meanwhile, nobody had told Chantal any of this. Chantal was noticing coffee. The morning after their argument, she came into the kitchen at 6:30 a.m. and it was already made. Not the automatic kind, her specific order, her exact ratio, in her favorite mug, still warm. Taeyong was already gone. She stood in the kitchen and looked at that coffee for a long moment. Then she picked it up and drank it and left for work. It happened the next morning. And the one after. She told Precious on day 4, framing it very carefully as a neutral observation. Just information. Completely insignificant. Precious put both hands flat on the bakery counter and stared at her. He is waking up before sunrise to make your specific coffee order, and then leaving before you wake up so you don't feel pressured. Chantal. It's just coffee, Precious. It is an apology in beverage form, and I need you to take this seriously right now. Chantal went back to her kitchen. She was smiling at the wall where Precious couldn't see her. They both knew it. Zion came in that same afternoon and said something genuinely funny within range of Precious, who laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh, surprised completely out of her. Zion looked at her with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been working toward exactly that reaction for several weeks, and then deliberately looked away. Chantal watched this from her kitchen doorway and felt something rearrange in her understanding. She thought back through the past weeks, the way Zion's attention, when she traced it carefully, always drifted toward wherever Precious was in the room. The casual questions folded into their late-night work conversations. The way he had never once looked at Chantal herself with anything beyond warm, collegial friendliness. A seed of realization planted itself and began, quietly, to grow. She found the cards on a Sunday. She was looking for a phone charger, nothing more. Third drawer, beneath a folder. 3 white envelopes. Her name on each one in Taeyong's handwriting. Each one sealed. Purchase receipts still in the cellophane on the back, dated exactly 1 year apart. 3 consecutive anniversaries. Bought every year. Never given. Never opened. Just sealed and placed in a drawer like something he had meant to do and couldn't find the way to. She sat down on the floor right there. Not in a chair, the floor, back against the desk, all 3 envelopes in her hands. She didn't open them. She didn't cry. She just sat with them and felt the full weight of what they meant. Not that he didn't care, but that he had cared in silence for 3 years and swallowed it every single time. That sitting in that drawer was 3 years of a man who felt something and had no idea what to do with it. She put them back exactly as she found them. Went to the kitchen. Started cooking something she didn't need just to have somewhere to put her hands. She told nobody. She held it alone, and it sat in her chest like something with real weight. And, honestly, that moment, Chantal sitting on the floor with those 3 unopened envelopes, is the kind of thing that stays with you long after the story ends. The rumor reached Taeyong on a Tuesday. Not from Juno. From Daeho over a private lunch, in a tone of deep, reluctant concern. Daeho laid it out carefully. The alleged contact. The alleged information. The timeline constructed to look credible. He shook his head slowly like a man delivering news that genuinely pained him. Taeyang drove back to his office in silence and sat at his desk and turned it over in his mind. He reached for the part of him that would reject it immediately and completely. It took too long to find. And in that delay, in those hours of not being certain, something cracked that would not be easy to repair. He stopped going to Sunday Suite. 3 days. Then 4. Then a full week. The coffee kept appearing every morning. He was still waking up early, still making it, still leaving before she woke. But everything else closed back over like water over a stone. Chantal noticed the absence on day 3. By day 5, she was lying awake running back through everything, looking for what had changed. She found nothing. Because the thing that had changed had nothing to do with anything she had done. She just didn't know that yet. The floor had shifted underneath everything and was still dropping, slowly, in the dark, while a lie kept breathing quietly inside her marriage, and a man who had finally started to wake up had just, at the worst possible moment, closed his eyes again. Chapter 6. The car came on a Wednesday evening. Chantal had just locked up Sunday Suite, last one out, keys in hand, the honest tiredness of a full day sitting in her shoulders. A black car was parked directly outside. A man stood beside it, well-dressed, calm, hands visible. He didn't touch her. Didn't raise his voice. Simply said that her presence was requested and that the drive would be short. He held the door open and waited with the specific patience of someone who already knew she would get in. She got in. The building was clean and quiet and completely anonymous from the outside. Inside, she was led to a room with a long table and 2 chairs and Daeho seated at the far end with a glass of water and the expression of a man who had already decided how this conversation would end before it began. He smiled when she walked in. Chantal, thank you for coming. She sat down across from him because standing felt like showing fear, and she had not come this far in life to show Daeho fear. Her heart was loud in her chest, but her face gave nothing away. Southwest Atlanta had built that into her whether she asked for it or not. He laid out the allegation with remarkable pleasantness. The federal contact. The financial details. The timeline. No documents on the table, because this was never about evidence. He was not presenting a case. He was delivering a conclusion and waiting to see what she did with it. I want to be clear, he said warmly, that this doesn't have to become complicated. Where is my husband? Something moved behind Daeho's eyes. Just briefly. Taeyang is aware of the situation. That is not what I asked you. The door opened. Taeyang walked in. And Chantal looked at his face and felt the floor go completely. She had prepared herself in the car ride over. She had braced for fear, for confrontation, for whatever shape this night was going to take. What she had not prepared for, what she could not have prepared for, was looking at her husband's face and finding doubt there. Not rage. Not certainty. Doubt. The specific, terrible expression of a man fighting something he didn't want to believe and not entirely winning the fight. She saw it for only a second before he locked it away. But she saw it. She turned back to the table and said nothing. She understood instinctively that anything she said in this room to defend herself would be collected and used. So she sat straight and waited and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with Daeho. Her husband had doubted her. Even for a moment. Even for 1 second. After everything, after 3 years of showing up, of covering plates, of crying in parking garages, and composing her face before coming upstairs, he had sat with a lie about her and not immediately, completely, thrown it out. Then the door opened again. Juno walked in with a plain brown folder and placed it on the table quietly, without ceremony. He didn't look at Daeho. He looked directly at Taeyong. Before anything else happens, Juno said, "You need to read this." The folder held 6 weeks of quiet, careful work. The rumor traced back through 3 conversations to a single point of origin. Fabricated timeline with dates that collapsed under scrutiny. Communication records that shouldn't exist if the story were true, but did exist to show who had constructed it. And at the center of it all, the identity of the person who had actually been feeding information to federal investigators about the syndicate's operations. The silence in that room as Taeyong read was the kind that has physical weight. Daeho reached for his composure and found slightly less of it than he needed. "This is. Your name is on the instruction," Juno said quietly. "Two of the three people who carried this rumor report directly to you. And the federal contact you used to build the timeline has been actively cooperating with investigators for 4 months." He paused. "About you." Taeyang put the folder down. Now here is the part that nobody saw coming. Nobody in that room, and nobody watching. The federal contact Daeho had used to construct the rumor, the person he had pointed at Chantal to create the appearance of a source, had been feeding information the entire time. Not about Chantal. About Daeho himself. Every operational detail. Every financial record. Everything. And that person had been inside the syndicate for years. Juno said the name. The room went completely still. It was someone who had been in the background of the story from the very beginning. Someone whose position made them easy to overlook. Someone who had been watching Chantal from a distance this entire time, not for the syndicate, not for Daeho, but for her. Keeping a wall between her and the worst of what this world could do to her, quietly, without credit, without her ever knowing. Taeyong looked at Chantal. She was already looking at him. And what was on her face was not relief. It was not vindication. It was the face of a woman deciding what to do with a husband who had doubted her, even briefly, even for a handful of hours, when she had never, through 3 years of silence and covered plates and parking garage tears, doubted him once. That moment sat between them like something that could not be untouched. Daeho was still in the room. The folder was still on the table. But none of that was what mattered anymore. What mattered was the distance between two people sitting in the same room, and whether anything that had just been broken could ever be made whole again. Chapter 7. The arrest happened on a Friday morning, and it was quiet in the way that only truly well-prepared things are quiet. No sirens. No dramatic confrontation. Just federal agents, a warrant, and 3 years of financial records that Taeyong had maintained with the same precision he brought to everything clean, detailed, and impossible to argue with. He had handed them over the morning after that room. No hesitation. No negotiation. Just a man who had finally decided that the debt he owed Daeho had been paid in full a long time ago, and he simply hadn't been willing to see it until now. Daeho was arrested before lunch. The syndicate didn't explode. It didn't go to war. It just stopped. The way a machine stops when you remove the single component everything else depended on. Quietly. Completely. Just paper and consequence and 11 years of carefully constructed operations folding in on themselves without a single dramatic moment to mark it. Taeyong resigned from everything. Closed the office. Released his staff. Signed what needed to be signed. He didn't make a speech about it. He didn't explain himself to anyone. He simply stopped, the way you stop doing something when you finally understand it was never yours to begin with. And then he went home to an empty penthouse. Chantal was at Miss Claudette's. She had left the night of that room, and she had not gone back. Not out of dramatic declaration, she hadn't slammed doors or sent long messages. She had simply gone to her mother's temporary Atlanta rental, put her bag down, sat on the couch, and stayed there. Precious was there too, because Precious was always where Chantal was when it mattered. Here's what people don't understand about the way Chantal felt in those days. They expect rage. They expect the kind of sharp, loud anger that makes for satisfying television. But what Chantal felt was not that. What Chantal felt was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't touch. The night with Daeho had frightened her deeply, not just in the moment, but in what it revealed. The world her husband actually operated in. The real dimensions of it. The danger that had been living quietly alongside their marriage this entire time without her knowledge or consent. She needed to sit with that. She needed to know, honestly and without pressure, whether she still wanted to walk back into it. Even a version of it without Daeho. Even a Taeyong who had chosen her. She needed to know if she still wanted this, and she needed to figure that out without anyone standing in front of her waiting for an answer. Miss Claudette, to her enormous credit, did not push. She cooked. She prayed. She let her daughter sit in the quiet and feel what she needed to feel. Precious also did not push. Mostly because Precious was dealing with her own situation. Zion had been texting Precious for 2 weeks. She had been responding in this specific way that means everything, quick replies, excessive punctuation, emojis she would deny using if asked. Chantal had watched this unfold from the couch with the detached amusement of someone who had seen it coming for considerably longer than Precious had. The relationship became official on a Tuesday afternoon in the most chaotic way imaginable. Zion showed up at Miss Claudette's door, in person, unannounced, holding flowers that were clearly purchased in a hurry, and told Precious through the screen door that he had been trying to ask her out for 6 weeks, and he was done being subtle about it. Miss Claudette appeared behind Precious before anyone could stop her, looked Zion up and down thoroughly, and said, "You're late," and walked back to the kitchen. Precious stood at that door for approximately 4 seconds. Then she opened it. Chantal watched the whole thing from the couch and laughed, really laughed, the full kind for the first time in days. And if you needed a reminder that life continues happening even in the middle of the hardest parts, Precious and Zion's chaotic, overdue, Miss Claudette witnessed relationship becoming official in a doorway is exactly that reminder. The thing that reframed everything arrived by accident on a Thursday. Chantal had gone back to the penthouse to collect more of her things. Taeyong wasn't there. She moved through the space quickly and efficiently, gathering what she needed, keeping her eyes forward. She almost missed it. On the shelf in his home office, behind 2 books, was a small notebook. It had fallen slightly sideways, and she only noticed it because something slid when she reached past it. She would have left it completely alone, it wasn't hers, but it fell open when it hit the desk. She looked down without meaning to. It was full of her. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, private, deeply personal way that made it clear nobody was ever supposed to see this. Observations written in his careful handwriting. Things she had said that he had remembered and written down. Small details about her, the way she reorganized things when she was thinking, her laugh, the recipe she hummed while she worked, a joke she had made 2 years ago that he had apparently found funny enough to write down and never told her. Pages and pages spanning, she checked the dates, 3 years. 3 years of a man who was paying attention to every single thing and had no idea what to do with any of it. She sat down slowly with the notebook in her hands. And then she cried. Not from sadness. From the specific grief of understanding something too late and too fully all at once, that the silence had never been emptiness. It had been a man who felt everything and had been taught, somewhere deep and early, that feeling things was not something he was allowed to do out loud. She put the notebook back where she found it and sat in that office for a long time. Then she went back to Miss Claudette's and didn't tell anyone what she had found. But something in her face had shifted. Precious noticed. She said nothing. Sometimes the most important moments are the ones nobody witnesses. Chapter 8. Taeyong did not chase her. This is important. Because everything about who he used to be, the control, the management, the careful positioning would have moved him to chase. To fix. To handle it. But he didn't. He signed the penthouse over to Chantal's name on a Monday morning. He opened a dedicated bank account for Sunday Suite and transferred enough to cover a full year of operating costs and expansion. He left both documents with her lawyer without attaching a single word of explanation to either of them. Then he disappeared for 3 weeks. Nobody knew exactly where he went. Juno knew, because Juno always knew, and he kept it to himself. What mattered was that Taeyong was gone, and he had left behind no pressure, no expectation, no request for anything in return. Just 2 documents that said, in the only language he had ever been fluent in, that her life and what she had built in it mattered to him more than anything he was walking away from. Precious found out about the bank account on a Wednesday and called Chantal into the back kitchen and showed her the notification on the business account. Chantal looked at the number, looked at the transfer note, which said only Sunday Suite, no conditions. She put the phone down and went back to work. Precious watched her go and wisely said nothing. He came back on a Monday. Not to the penthouse, to Sunday Suite. 6 a.m., before the bakery opened, standing outside on the pavement in a plain dark jacket with his hands in his pockets. Not knocking. Not calling. Just there. Chantal saw him through the front window when she arrived to open up. She stood inside and looked at him through the glass for a moment. Then she went to the back and started her prep work. He was gone when she came back to the front an hour later. He came back Tuesday. Same time. Same spot. Same stillness. She saw him, looked at him for a moment through the window, and went back to work. He left after an hour. Wednesday. Thursday. And listen, this is the part that will have viewers absolutely losing their minds, because he wasn't doing this to be seen. He wasn't standing outside her bakery to make a point or apply pressure or wait for a reaction. He was just being near her, in the only way available to him that didn't ask anything of her. Present without demanding that presence means something. By Thursday, Precious was watching from the window with both hands pressed to her face, whispering things that were technically prayers, but did not sound like any prayer Miss Claudette would recognize. Friday morning, the 5th morning, Chantal unlocked the front door and left it open. She went back to the kitchen. He came in. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment, looking at her working, and she did not turn around. "Can I learn to make something?" he said. She turned around then, looked at him for a long moment. Then she took an apron from the hook on the wall and held it out. "My grandmother's sweet potato pound cake," she said. "You can start there." This, and anyone who knows baking will understand immediately, was not a beginner recipe. This was a recipe with steps, with technique, with the particular demands of a dish that has been made a specific way for decades, and will let you know immediately when you have not respected it. Taeyong looked at the recipe card. Then he tied the apron on and picked up the first ingredient. He failed in the first 10 minutes. The texture was wrong in a way that defied the instructions. Precious, who had arrived by this point and taken a stool in the corner of the kitchen, announced the failure with the detailed enthusiasm of a sports commentator. He tried again. Wrong again. Precious updated her commentary. Miss Claudette called during attempt 3, somehow, from Atlanta, as though she had sensed something was happening, and Chantal put her on speaker, which meant Miss Claudette was able to provide live feedback on both Taeyong's baking and his general life choices simultaneously. Taeyong said, "Yes, ma'am," 7 times in 4 minutes. Chantal was laughing. Really laughing. The full kind, the effortless kind, and she wasn't trying to hide it. Attempt 4 was closer. Precious acknowledged this grudgingly. During attempt 4, while the cake was in the oven and the kitchen had gone quieter, Chantal reached into the pocket of her apron and placed 3 envelopes on the counter between them. Taeyong went still. She opened the first one. She read it quietly. The kitchen was completely silent except for the oven. She read every word he had written a year ago and sealed and put away and never found the courage to give her. Then she put it down and opened the second one. By the third envelope her hands were not entirely steady. She read it to the end. Put it down, and sat with all 3 open in front of her. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to explain or add to what was already on those pages. He just stood on the other side of the counter and let her have the full weight of it. She cried quietly. Not a breakdown, just tears that came without permission, the kind you can't stop once they start. Precious, to her eternal credit, picked up her stool and quietly moved it out of the kitchen entirely, taking Miss Claudette's voice off speaker as she went. He cried too. Briefly, without announcement, in the way of someone who was not practiced at it. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth once and looked at the counter. When she could speak again, she looked up at him. "We start over," she said. "From the beginning. Properly this time." "Yes," he said. "No conditions. No negotiation. No qualifications." The oven timer went off. Attempt 4 was perfect. Chapter 9. 3 weeks later. A Tuesday morning. The sky outside still dark, the city not yet fully awake. Taeyang was already in the kitchen. He had let himself in with the key Chantal had not asked for him to return, and he was standing at the counter with flour on his shirt, a crease between his brows, and the recipe card propped against the mixer like a document he was cross-examining. He was muttering in Korean, quietly, to himself, the specific muttering of a man who is completely out of his depth and has made peace with that fact entirely. He didn't hear Chantal come in. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him for a moment. Just watched. The flour on his shirt. The careful, serious way he was measuring. The fact that he was here before sunrise on a Tuesday with nobody asking him to be, no audience, no gesture being performed for anyone. Just a man learning something difficult because it mattered to someone he loved. This, right here, is what choosing someone actually looks like. Not the grand moment. The Tuesday morning. Outside, Sunday Sweet's new signage was visible through the front window. The hotel partnership had expanded 3 weeks ago, full creative collaboration, 2 new locations in the Ellery's sister properties, a waiting list for the signature boxes. Precious had screamed for so long when the contract came through that a customer asked if everything was okay. Everything was more than okay. Everything was, quietly and steadily, wonderful. Chantal leaned against the doorframe and let herself have this moment before it knew it was being watched. Then she said his name. He looked up. Flour on his jaw. Apron slightly crooked. Completely undone in the best possible way. She walked to the counter. Cut a small piece. Tasted it. Went still. Tasted it again, slowly this time, making sure she was right. She looked up at him. You got it. And there it was. The thing that had been almost happening since a wedding in Buckhead 3 years ago, that almost smile that had started this whole story finally, completely, became a real one. Full. Unhurried. The kind of smile that had clearly always been there, just waiting for the right conditions to come forward. It was worth every single part of the wait. Behind the front counter, between the menu board and the window, hung a small framed photo. Viewers will recognize it. It was the photo Precious posted. Chantal laughing, head thrown back, hand on Zion's arm, completely alive. The photo that started everything, that made a quiet man suddenly unable to look away from a life he had been absent from. But now, knowing everything, the notebook, the cards, the 5 a.m. coffee, the man standing outside a bakery for 5 consecutive mornings just to be near her without asking for anything, that photo means something completely different. It was never about Zion. It was never about jealousy and the way people think about jealousy. It was a man finally seeing, in one captured moment, exactly what he had been too close to reach for. And deciding, too slowly, imperfectly, at great cost, to reach for it anyway. Chantal had framed it herself and hung it there deliberately. Taeyong had seen it on his first morning in the kitchen and said nothing. She had watched him look at it and said nothing. Some things don't need to be explained when they are already understood. Two people. Flour and soft morning light. A bakery that smelled like brown butter and vanilla and the particular comfort of something real. No grand confession. No wedding redo. No speech. Just a Tuesday. And if this story moved you, if you found yourself angry at a covered plate, or broken over 3 sealed envelopes in a drawer, or smiling at a man with flour on his shirt who finally got it right, then you already understand what this story was really about. It was never just about jealousy. It was about two people who needed to find their way back to each other through the hardest version of the journey. And somehow, imperfectly and completely, they did. If you've been here from part 1, thank you for staying until the 5th try. Drop a comment and tell me which part broke you the most, because I already know it wasn't just one. Share this with someone who needs to hear a story like this today. And if you haven't watched from the beginning, every part is right here on this channel waiting for you. Some stories stay with you. This one was always meant to.